Artemis II is heading into one of the most dangerous moments of the entire mission, and for 4 long minutes, no one on Earth will be able to help. When the Orion spacecraft slams into Earth's atmosphere at nearly 40,000 kilometers per hour, something extreme happens. The air around it turns into a thick layer of superheated plasma. This glowing shield blocks every radio signal. Inside the capsule, the astronauts will see the windows shine bright white. They'll feel the crushing force pushing them into their seats. Around them, the sound of the atmosphere tearing past will be loud and violent. Back in Houston, everything goes silent. Screens go blank, no data, no voice, nothing. If the heat shield does its job, communication comes back. If it doesn't, the silence continues. On April 1st, 2026, Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen launched from Kennedy Space Center aboard the most powerful rocket NASA has ever built. They became the first humans to leave Earth orbit since 1972. This mission marks many firsts: the first woman, the first Black astronaut, and the first Canadian to travel beyond low Earth orbit. Their journey takes them over 406,000 kilometers from Earth and thousands of kilometers beyond the far side of the Moon, farther than any human has ever gone. But every bit of that distance comes with a cost. Getting to the Moon is about power. Getting back home is about survival. Surprisingly, the part that worries engineers the most isn't the launch. It went almost perfectly. It's not the powerful burn that sent Orion toward the Moon. It's not even the 50 minutes of silence when the spacecraft disappears behind the Moon. The real concern is the final 10 minutes of the mission, and especially a terrifying 4-minute window during re-entry. During those minutes, the outside of the capsule heats up to more than 2,700 degrees Celsius. Communication is completely lost, and everything depends on one thing: the heat shield. There is no backup plan, no escape option, no second chance. If something fails during those 4 minutes, there's nothing mission control can do, and the crew won't have time to fix it either. For comparison, spacecraft returning from the International Space Station travel at about 28,000 kilometers per hour. That's already fast, but we understand it well. Orion comes in much faster, over 40,000 kilometers per hour. That's about 32 times the speed of sound, faster than any human has ever traveled. At that speed, air can't move out of the way. It gets crushed in front of the capsule, heats up, and turns into plasma. The temperature becomes so intense that most metals would melt instantly. Without protection, the spacecraft would be destroyed in seconds. That protection is called avcoat. Avcoat is a special material designed to burn away on purpose. As the heat rises, the outer layer chars and slowly breaks off, carrying heat away from the spacecraft. It sacrifices itself so the crew inside can survive. This same material was used during the Apollo missions, and it worked perfectly back then. So when engineers designed Orion, they trusted what had worked before. But there was one big change. Apollo heat shields were built like a honeycomb, with hundreds of thousands of tiny cells, each filled by hand. It was slow and detailed work. For Orion, the process was simplified. Instead of tiny cells, engineers used about 186 large blocks, shaped to fit together like pieces of a puzzle and attached to the surface. It saved time, but there was one big question: would it perform the same way? In 2022, they got their answer. Artemis I sent an uncrewed Orion around the Moon and back. The mission was a success until engineers inspected the heat shield. They found unexpected damage in more than 100 places. Instead of wearing down smoothly, parts of the material cracked and broke off in uneven chunks. Some areas even exposed deeper layers that were never supposed to face that level of heat. Something wasn't behaving as expected. The issue seemed connected to how Orion returned to Earth. Unlike Apollo, Orion used a technique called skip re-entry. Instead of coming straight down, the capsule dipped into the atmosphere, then bounced back out briefly before making its final descent like a stone skipping across water. This method helps control where the spacecraft lands, giving engineers more flexibility. But it also changes how heat and stress affect the shield. And that's the challenge Artemis II now faces. The
The system has been studied, tested, and approved, but in the end, it all comes down to those final moments. Skip re-entry was meant to be a smart upgrade, a modern improvement over Apollo, but inside the heat shield, it created a serious problem. Here's what happened. During the first part of the re-entry, the capsule briefly climbed back out of the atmosphere. As it did, the intense heat suddenly dropped. That change set off a chain reaction inside the heat shield material. The shield, made of avcoat, works by slowly burning and releasing gases as it absorbs heat. Normally, those gases escape through tiny pores on the surface. It's a balanced system that keeps everything under control. But when the heating suddenly stopped during the skip, the outer layer hardened and became less porous, almost like it sealed itself. Meanwhile, the material underneath was still hot and still producing gas. That gas had nowhere to go.
Pressure started building up inside the shield. Then, when the capsule dove back into the atmosphere for the second time, those trapped pockets burst, blowing chunks of the heat shield off. There is one important detail many people miss. Even with over 100 areas of unexpected damage, the inside of the spacecraft stayed safe. The cabin temperature never rose beyond comfortable levels. In fact, the heat shield still did its main job, blocking the heat. But the problem was unpredictability. The material didn't wear away smoothly like it was supposed to. It broke apart in random places, and that's dangerous. It's like using a parachute that opens, but you're not sure where holes might appear. For Artemis II, NASA made a tough decision. They did not replace the heat shield. It was already built and attached to the spacecraft. Replacing it would have caused years of delay for a program already pushed back multiple times. Instead, they changed how the spacecraft will return to Earth. No more skip re-entry. This time, Orion will take a more direct path into the atmosphere. It will hit harder and faster, but it won't pause in the middle so gases won't get trapped inside the shield. Of course, this comes with trade-offs. The crew will feel stronger G-forces, the spacecraft will face higher stress, the heat will be even more intense at its peak, and there will be fewer landing options. NASA tested this new plan carefully. They ran simulations and extreme heat tests, even under worse conditions than before. In every case, the cabin stayed safe. Still, spaceflight is never risk-free. NASA estimates the chance of losing the crew could be as low as 1 in 50, or as high as 1 in 2, depending on how you look at it. Their official safety target sits around 1 in 30. That risk becomes most real during re-entry. Rick Henfling, the lead flight director, is responsible for guiding the mission through those final moments. His team in Houston tracks every detail, except during the most critical part, because during peak re-entry, they'll lose all contact. This blackout has been part of space travel since the very beginning. At extreme speeds, the plasma surrounding the capsule blocks all signals. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. For about 4 minutes, mission control will see nothing but blank screens, and inside the capsule, the astronauts can do nothing but wait. This kind of silence has happened before. In 1970, during Apollo 13, engineers feared the heat shield had been damaged after an explosion. When the spacecraft returned, the expected blackout lasted longer than usual, 4 minutes, then 5, then 6. Mission control sat in complete silence, unsure if the crew had survived. Then, finally, a voice broke through and relief filled the room. But not every story ends that way. In 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia was lost during re-entry after damage to its heat shield. The crew never received a warning. Mission control only realized something was wrong when the signal disappeared and never came back. That's the reality of re-entry. It's not just another phase of the mission, it's the final test. Launch is loud and powerful. The journey through space is quiet and beautiful, but re-entry is unforgiving. Everything has to be perfect. The angle must be exact. Too shallow and the spacecraft skips off into space. Too steep and the heat or G-forces become deadly. The heat shield must hold. The parachutes must open at the right time. The cabin must stay sealed. And it all happens in just a few minutes, while moving so fast the air itself turns into fire.
Orion's heat shield is massive, about 5 meters wide, the largest ever built for a crewed spacecraft, and soon it will face its ultimate test. Those 186 Avcoat blocks on the heat shield may not sound like much, but they are everything. Each one is only about 2.5 to 7.5 centimeters thick. That's all that stands between 4 astronauts, and temperatures so extreme they could melt metal in an instant. It's a thin line, just a few centimeters of material designed to burn in a very controlled way to keep the crew alive. Once the spacecraft survives the most intense heat, the danger isn't over yet. Orion will still be falling at high speed. At around 7,600 meters above the ocean, 2 small parachutes called drogue chutes will deploy. Their job is to stabilize the capsule and slow it down from about 480 kilometers per hour. Then comes the next step. 3 pilot chutes will pull out the main parachutes, huge canopies that will finally slow the spacecraft to a safer speed of about 27 kilometers per hour. If everything works as planned, Orion will land in the Pacific Ocean, not far from San Diego. A US Navy ship will already be there, waiting to recover the crew. If this mission succeeds, it will prove something incredibly important. We already know Orion can travel to the moon and back. That was shown in Artemis I, but Artemis II has a bigger goal, proving that humans can safely make that journey and return alive. It's about showing that the heat shield can protect real people under the most extreme heat any crewed spacecraft has ever faced. It's about proving that the new re-entry plan actually works, because the next mission, Artemis III, depends on it. And that's the mission that aims to land astronauts on the moon. If Artemis II can't prove the return journey is safe, Artemis III simply cannot happen. But there's another risk, one that comes from space itself. The crew launched during a time when the sun is very active. This period, known as the peak of the solar cycle, means stronger solar storms and more radiation. Once the spacecraft leaves Earth's protective magnetic field, it becomes vulnerable. A powerful solar event could expose the crew to dangerous levels of radiation. Inside Orion, there's a small, specially shielded area where the astronauts can gather if a solar storm hits. But here's the truth, it has never been fully tested with people inside during a worst-case event. The crew knows all of this.
They studied the heat shield problems from the previous mission. They saw the damage. They reviewed the new design, the updated flight plan, and the risk numbers. They understand what those numbers mean, and they still chose to go. Reid Wiseman spent years landing fighter jets on aircraft carriers at night, one of the most difficult tasks a pilot can face. Imagine trying to park a car at high speed on a tiny, moving platform in complete darkness, surrounded by ocean. Victor Glover has flown combat missions and already lived in space aboard the International Space Station. Christina Koch spent 328 days in orbit, the longest single spaceflight by a woman at the time. These aren't just astronauts, they are people who understand risk and move forward anyway. Jeremy Hansen is a former fighter pilot and the only person on this crew who has never been to space before. Around April 10th, Orion will reach a point called Entry Interface, about 122,000 meters above Earth. This is where the atmosphere finally starts to matter. At that moment, something important happens. The service module, the part of the spacecraft built in Europe that has powered the mission, provided air, water, and propulsion, will detach and burn up in the atmosphere behind them. Everything that isn't needed gets thrown away. The launch escape system, the boosters, the main rocket engines, the service module, all gone. Piece by piece, the massive rocket that carried them into space disappears. What's left is just a small capsule, about the size of a large SUV, falling alone toward Earth. Orion will turn itself so the heat shield faces forward. The onboard computer takes control, making tiny adjustments using small thrusters to guide the capsule toward its landing zone. Then, the real test begins. In less than 90 seconds, the temperature outside will rise past 2,000 degrees. A layer of plasma will wrap around the capsule like a glowing shell. And just like that, communication will be gone. For 4 minutes, the Artemis II crew will be completely on their own. No voices from Earth, no data, just 4 humans, a spacecraft, and the laws of physics. Back in Houston, Flight Director Rick Henfling and his team will sit in silence, staring at blank screens, counting every second. They've trained for this moment, again and again, but training is never the same as reality. Everyone in that room knows it. Because when the signal comes back, when that first sound or data finally breaks through, the answer will be clear. The heat shield worked. Or it didn't. More than 50 years ago, humans stopped going to the moon, not because we couldn't, but because we chose to stop. Since then, the farthest we've gone is just a few hundred kilometers above Earth, staying close, safe, and within reach. Artemis II is the first real step back. Not a giant leap, but proof that we can do it again. 4 astronauts flying a spacecraft that has never carried people before, heading toward a place humanity hasn't visited in generations, relying on systems that must work perfectly this time. What happens next will shape the future. Every mission after this, every moon landing, every base, every step toward Mars depends on these moments. If the signal comes back, the moon becomes part of our future again. If it doesn't, everything pauses. We're about to find out. If you enjoyed this and want to follow this journey as it unfolds, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Stay with us as we witness history being written, one mission at a time.